So welcome everyone. This is a really important conversation. So excited to have you here today. I'm Meredith Bellbaum. I'm the Executive Director at Built Environment Plus. We have this meeting style to encourage a sense of community, so feel free to leave your cameras on. I know it helps me to be able to see people going, yeah, that makes sense to me. We also encourage you to use the chat to put questions in the chat. The presenters will be watching the chat and answering questions over the course of the event. We do ask you to stay muted though. At the end of the presentation, we will answer questions and may have more of a dialogue and be asking people to come off chat to ask some questions at the end of the presentation. We are in fact recording the presentation, as Betsy Ames just asked. We're recording the presentation, and we also will be making the slides available for everyone after. So we're here today to talk about net zero buildings and incentives to pay for them. Massachusetts, you may not know this, already has over 16.5 million square feet of net zero and net zero ready buildings built or in process. I'm just verifying, yes, that it is recording. Yes, it's recording. Okay, that's good. So I'm going to repeat that again. So you may not know this already, but Massachusetts has over 16.5 million square feet of net zero and net zero ready buildings built or in process. That's actually all that we were able to find. There's more than that. That we put out in a report in March 2022. That number is growing every day. We're working on releasing our third report of this presentation in the next couple of weeks. We'll also post the link to the study. So stay tuned. We're working on releasing our third report update in March of 2023, not in a couple of weeks. In a couple of weeks, we'll be posting this presentation. So stay tuned. The link is actually in the presentation right here. We'll post it in the chat. And we'll also post a link to the study in the chat in a minute as well. According to the research that we did as part of this study, these buildings do not have to cost more money. They don't have to cost more money, but sometimes they do. And the incentives you're going to hear about today will ensure that these buildings become the new normal. We're talking about the new normal with these incentives. There's a lot going on related to climate change in Mass now. In 2021, we had Governor Baker's Climate Act, which established goals of 50% carbon reduction by 2030 and zero carbon by 2050. We have a new commercial energy code that's coming out effective in July, and a more stringent stretch energy code, as well as I know I'm anxiously awaiting, I know a lot of others are anxiously awaiting the new opt-in specialized code that's even more stretchy than the stretch code that's going to be the stretch code. We also know local jurisdictions are also setting their own carbon targets and other climate related goals for new and existing buildings. They're creating net zero zoning codes like what Boston is doing, and also proposing gas bans. Now, MassSave just released some major new incentives that's going to help the Commonwealth with its carbon reduction targets. That's why we're here today, as well as, if that's not enough, there's a new Federal Inflation Reduction Act, which offers new tax credits and deductions. So a lot going on, a lot to talk about. What I want to do is focus on these incentives right now. What we're going to be focusing on today are the MassSave incentives. We have incentives for commercial buildings for new construction, net zero and low energy use intensity, or EUI, as well as incentives for commercial deep energy retrofits. MassSave also has incentives for multifamily new construction passive house, as well as incentives for an all-electric new home. We're going to add those together with the Federal Inflation Reduction Act that we're going to hear about soon, with that has both tax credits and deductions. And when you add those up together, there's a lot of money available for your projects and a lot of incentives available. So first up, we're going to have MassSave is going to talk about their incentives. We have Kim Cullinane and Jim Piermarini from Eversource, who are going to talk about new construction and deep energy retrofit. And then Luke McKneally with ICF is going to be talking about the multifamily new construction as well, passive house, as well as all electric home. Then we're going to pass it to Jerome Garciano from McKneally, who's going to talk about the IRA tax credits and deductions. Jerome's going to show examples of how lucrative the incentives can be when you add them and put them together. Mark Sandeen from Lexington is then going to show us how some of this is playing out in real projects in Lexington. And lastly, I just want to say in every discussion we have in building electrification, there are two questions that come up. The first one is about cost. Well, that's what we're covering today, and how to tackle some of that with costs. And then the second one is about grid capacity, and we're going to be talking about that today. I always say when people ask about how's the grid going to handle all this extra load, I say, well, you know, if the design team does their jobs right, the buildings actually don't have to have increased load. We can balance those loads out because the systems that we're using for air conditioning are so much more efficient than they were before with the heat pump technology. So it doesn't have to go up. However, we do know that the utilities are focusing and looking at grid readiness and upgrading the grid for loads, so increase. So we have Jacob Lucas who's going to be talking about that also from Eversource. My part's done. I'm now going to hand it over to Lisa Cunningham from ZeroCarbonMA.
Thank you, Meredith. Good morning. My name is Lisa Cunningham, and I'm an architect and a co-founder of ZeroCarbonMA. For the past 3.5 years, I've been working at the local and state level to pass electrification legislation. The idea for this workshop began when I reached out to my friend and colleague, Bev Craig of MassCEC, and asked her to explain the ways the new MassSave incentives could help our newest town school project. Since a lot of my climate work is based on interfacing with municipalities, I have seen upfront the need to get accurate information into the hands of our local decision makers. As an architect, I also understand the need to get critical information to project teams before a project starts, not when it is well into or done with the design process. And again, as an architect and someone who has worked on several ground source heat pump projects in the past few years, I know that rebates and incentives can be economic game changers. As Bev says, these incentives are no-brainers. I want to especially welcome our municipal officials and community leaders here today. While we are still struggling with inadequate building codes that plan to allow new fossil fuel infrastructure, flying in the face of climate, economic, and health data, there is now widespread recognition from building professionals as well as many municipal and climate leaders that we must electrify everything, and that our built environment is a critical component of this. Thank you so much to BE Plus for hosting this event, and Meredith and Ryan for all their help and hard work in partnering with us on this workshop. And another shout out to Bev Craig for her extensive work to pull this event together. Thanks also to our many climate allies and co-sponsors who helped us get the word out. And last but not least, huge thanks to our panelists today who spent many hours crafting their presentations and working collaboratively to put this event together. And now I'm going to pass this over to Kim Cullinane to kick this presentation off. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Kim Cullinane. I'm the supervisor of new construction energy efficiency for Eversource. And today I'm representing the MassSave sponsors, all of the MassSave sponsors. And I'm going to talk about our commercial and industrial, or C&I, as we call it sometimes, new construction and major renovation program. I do want to emphasize that even though we talk about C&I, this program also includes municipal, state projects as well, any institutional project or nonprofit. So really any non-residential commercial building that is a customer of one of the MassSave companies, which are Eversource, National Grid, Unitil, Cape Light Compact, and Liberty Utilities. So we're going to talk about our so we do have 3 pathways for participation if you're a commercial C&I project. I am going to emphasize path 1 for this presentation because we are focused on net zero for this discussion. That path one offer is our best offer anyway. It's the direction that we want as many customers as possible to go in. It's our most lucrative offer. But across all three of these pathways, we do provide incentives to get customers to get off fossil fuels. So we are 100% behind decarbonization of buildings, getting off fossil fuels. And so I'm going to talk about incentive rates for heat pump technology specifically that actually do apply to all three paths. But the best path, particularly for municipal projects, and that's a big target audience for this particular group, path one is exceptionally good for those projects. We're seeing a lot of participation from K through 12 schools, libraries, police and fire, community centers. So we definitely want to see you participate. And I also want to emphasize too, the importance of early engagement with us. We really want to see these customers coming in and talking to us as early as possible. The best projects that I've worked on, actually, we've had just really informal conversations with customers. You don't have to sign anything, but just we want to talk to you about what the pathway is about, how we can help, what others are doing in this space. Maybe there's some language we can help you with an RFS for design services or owner project management services. So those informal conversations have really been helpful in the beginning of some of the best projects that we've seen. So specifically for path one, again, I mentioned this is our most lucrative path. We do have the incentives here are $3.50 per square foot. So what we do here is we set an energy use intensity target. And that's really important because energy use intensity is basically an energy budget for your building. So we're setting that target as early as possible in design, and we're sticking to that with you and the design team all the way through design, all the way through construction, and all the way through a 1-year post-occupancy period. This is unique in that we really want to see these projects and these, net zero projects succeed, not just as predicted, net zero projects, but actually achieving those low energy use levels in post-occupancy. So we stick with you all the way through that period. We set that target and we pay $2 a square foot at the end of construction if the design and the building are built according to that target EUI. And then we add that extra $1.50 a square foot incentives at the end of the post-occupancy period. But what's really interesting and what we've added this year are these new heat pump adders. So you can see here when we're talking about air source, VRF, and ground source heat pumps, there's significant per ton incentives available there. And at $4,500 a ton for ground source heat pumps, that's our highest rate because it's so expensive to drill those wells, and we want to provide as much support as we can there. Just to give you to equate that incentive rate to a per square foot basis, that's about another, $4,500 a ton is about $11 a square foot. So when you're doing a path one project that's going all the way to net zero levels of EUIs and doing ground source heat pumps, now you're into incentives from MassSave reaching approximately $15 a square foot. So they're significant. If you go to the next slide, I can show you an actual example. This is a hypothetical project, but not atypical, 170,000 square foot new building. They're doing ground source heat pumps. So here you can see we provide, $10,000 in technical support. So we bring in support to help you get to the levels of energy use intensity that are required. The $2 a square foot in this particular project is $340,000. That's paid at the end of construction. We add that $4,500 a ton. That's $1.5 million. So that's going to be the biggest chunk of the incentive, also paid at the end of construction. And then there's the post-occupancy incentive. If the building actually operates where it needs to be at that less than the EUI target, that's another $255,000 in this example. So all in, just for MassSave, we're at $2.1 million for this project. And then you're going to hear Jerome talk later about the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, federal tax credits that you can layer on top of this. So there's a lot of really good support out there. Definitely engage because we really want to help you and we really want to get our customers off fossil fuels.
Thanks, Kim. You just said 2.1 million. Before we even talk about the IRA, I hope you guys are excited and your ears are perked now. We're going to go on to Jim, and he's going to talk about deep energy retrofits.
Thank you, Meredith and Kim. So again, my name is Jim Piermarini. I'm the supervisor of our energy efficiency initiatives team at Eversource. And as has been outlined, I'm here to talk a bit about the deep energy retrofit program, which was rolled out statewide in early November. So before diving into the details of the program, first I'd like to define, what constitutes a deep energy retrofit for the purposes of this program. And similar to Kim's programs, it all starts with setting a goal. So a 40% reduction in greenhouse gases in a single building is really the target that we're seeking for the deep energy retrofit program. And in order to get there, there's certainly going to be a string of energy efficiency projects that are stacked to reach that goal. And customers have a 3-year term to complete that. Electrification must be included as one of the line items. A weatherization or ventilation component is also another requirement. And at the back end of the projects, there is a commissioning requirement also to verify that the savings have actually been achieved. We don't want to just rely on the estimates up front. We want to set the goal and verify that the goal has been achieved through the commissioning. In terms of eligibility, the buildings must have a commercial meter, must be occupied for at least 1 year prior to engagement. Kim's major renovation pathway is excluded from the program. So this is a retrofit program designed to approach existing buildings, and renewables are excluded from the greenhouse gas reduction calculation. So the benefits of the program, the target should really be projects that are in the pre-development stage. And you'll see here, there's a whole bunch of technical assistance that's designed to outline the opportunity and develop the deep energy retrofit pathway, if you will. So it all starts with upfront engagement with your program sponsor and the customer. There's a no cost site assessment and scoping study that's offered that could be to the tune of $5,000 to $10,000. If the outcome of that is encouraging and identifies the potential to achieve the 40% reduction target, then all parties would proceed on to a full-blown technical assistance study. With that, there's a customer copay, but the value offered from the sponsors would be to the tune of $15,000 to $20,000 additional dollars. In the wake of that, the customer would receive a DER roadmap, if you will, that will itemize all of the project measures, as well as the percent reduction that is attributed to each of those measures. And what I can say is that every measure implemented would be qualified for standard program incentives. So, a couple measures that could be included could be lighting, or a building management system, or variable speed drives. And all of those measures would receive standard MassSave program incentives. And then if the deep energy retrofit target goal of 40% reduction is achieved, then the sponsors would deliver an additional $1 per square foot incentive above and beyond the standard incentives. And that particular dollar is actually broken up into 2 milestone payments. So once the building achieves a 25% reduction, there's a 40 cents per square foot milestone payment made. And then once the full 40% reduction is achieved, the additional 60 cents is released to total that $1 per square foot additional benefit. And as I referenced on the back end, there is a commissioning reimbursement as well of up to $20,000 to help assure that the measures that were installed actually achieve the energy savings that all parties were looking to reach. So this slide here is a bit busy, and I'm not sure if you can all see that bottom line. I apologize if it was truncated, but that is really what I would like to focus to be on here. So what this is outlining is a potential deep energy retrofit example in a 50,000 square foot library that takes place over the course of 3 years. So that first line item there, the pre-DER, outlines a total of $15,000 of incentives that could be delivered for all the technical assistance and scoping studies that are sort of the prequel to the implementation. Year 1, in this particular example, this customer decided to weatherize and implement a lighting upgrade. And the total of those incentives in this case were $25,000, with an additional $8,000 of commissioning value offered. In year 2, there was a variable refrigerant system installed, quite a large one here, which totals of about $430,000. That's a 124-ton system, which is basically completely displacing, the heating source of this type of building to a heat pump technology. We've got another building management system incentive So the total incentives that were achieved in this year two example would be $464,000 of standard incentives plus an additional $10,000 in commissioning. Year three, let's say there was an additional custom measure that could range from retro commissioning to a whole host of other savings potential that would achieve another $30,000 plus commissioning benefits. So in the bottom right-hand corner, the total here could reach upwards of $525,000 of incentive and deep energy retrofit value plus the commissioning. So quite a bit of money. So as was outlined in the previous slides there, this particular scenario shows $25,000 in lighting and insulation benefits, $444,000 in VRF and building management system incentives, another $6,000 in custom measure incentives. The deep energy retrofit benefit of $1 per square foot achieves another $50,000. And the total of the technical assistance and commissioning along the way could add up to another $35,000. So in total, it's a scenario where you have $560,000 of MassSave incentives over $10 per square foot that could be delivered to help this particular building achieve that 40% reduction goal. And as Kim had outlined, Jerome will be speaking later in terms of how the IRA could stack additional benefits on top of the very lucrative MassSave offers. And here is our website for the Deep Energy Retrofit Program. There's quite a few steps, so we didn't have the time today to dive into every single detail. But for those who are interested, please visit the website, reach out to your program sponsor. And I would encourage folks who are interested, the earlier you can engage, ideally pre-development, you'll stand the best chance of success within this program.
Great, thanks, Jim. And I just want to point out there are a lot of really great questions in the chat that you might want to go and take a look at coming through. A lot of people with some burning questions. And now we're going to move on to Luke McKneally with ICF, talking about new residential work.
Thank you, Meredith. Thank you, Jim and Kim. So I will be speaking about residential new construction, the all-electric home. I am an architect and certified passive house consultant with ICF, and we are the lead vendor for MassSave. And so I am, as well as Kim and Jim, representing all of the utilities that do support MassSave. And in particular, the all-electric program is residential single family through 4 units. And it is, as you might guess, no fossil fuel at all allowed in the home. We do need projects to get enrolled early. Just as Jim and Kim have been saying, the key to success is to get engaged early and to engage with a participating HERS rater. I am focused also at the higher end of the spectrum here because the greatest incentives are available through level 2, which does require a HERS rating of 35 or lower, or savings of 50% or more above a baseline, and an air infiltration test of less than 1 air change per hour at 50 pascals. If you go to the next slide. That can result in a substantial amount of money for each unit. For example, a single family can get up to $25,000 for going down this path, and a 4-family up to $40,000. So just a great opportunity. And on the all-electric home that is generally managed through the participating HERS raters, and so they will engage and register the project with MassSave. For multifamily of 5 units and more new construction, Passive House is a standard that we are focused on providing excellent quality control and excellent performance. And MassSave is supporting early stage design for feasibility and Passive House energy modeling. $5,000 for that feasibility study and up to $20,000 for energy modeling. throughout the design, making sure that it stays on track to achieve that certification. And once a project is pre-certified, it is eligible for $500 per unit with no maximum. And that, along with final certification after construction is complete of $2,500 per unit, again with no maximum, means that a project can get $3,000 per unit for achieving that Passive House certification, as well as a high quality, high performing building. The information, by the way, you can just find out more at the MassSave website, looking into either the single family or multifamily residential incentives. And similar to Kim and Jim's examples, here's a hypothetical 100-unit Passive House new construction project in which they perform an early stage feasibility study and get $5,000, $20K for additional energy modeling throughout the design, and ultimately upon certifications, getting $300,000 to round that out for a total of $325,000 in MassSave incentives. And as before, Jerome will follow up with Inflation Reduction Act opportunities to add on to that.
And now it's Jerome's turn. Take it away.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. Jerome Garciano here in the Boston office of Pulcinelli. I'm in the tax credit finance group. So I do a lot of transactional work in real estate that have these different types of incentives, whether it be energy efficiency or affordable housing. I think many of you probably received my compendium. I've been keeping track of these green incentives for a long time now, and certainly the Inflation Reduction Act was passed this summer is biggest change since I've been keeping track. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, as we've mentioned already. So these incentives that I'll cover will be ones that really come from the tax credit side, although there is another element of the Inflation Reduction Act that will be coming out next year in terms of funding from different other agencies. So I'm going to talk about the extension and expansion of the existing incentives. There are many incentives from renewable energy to energy efficiency, some that apply more to commercial contexts and some to more residential and personal homes. A lot to cover today. So the main credit is what we normally think of as the solar tax credit, is called the investment tax credit. And that is essentially a 30% tax credit. And this credit got expanded through the IRA. It was on schedule to be stepped down to 10% actually before the change. So we're really happy. I think all the renewable energy sector, I think, is in a really good spot now with this tax credit really kind of leading the way. So again, this tax credit is mainly used for solar, but obviously ground source heat pumps, energy storage now is a use for this tax credit. And so the subsidy comes from this 30% amount of the cost that essentially the taxpayer can take on their tax return to reduce their taxes. Oftentimes there are other taxpayers that partner up with the project owner to claim those credits, but I'll talk about the other opportunities now that really have availed itself since the Inflation Reduction Act. There are new bonus credits, a 10% addition for domestic content, meaning if the equipment and the components are made in the United States, so that 30% could become a 40% credit. If you're in a particular energy community, which includes a brownfield site and other kind of low income areas, that would be an additional 10%. And then specifically for solar and wind, there is a 10% or a 20% increase in the tax credit amount for special, special applications for those types of projects that deal with being in a low-income area, low-income census tract, or serving an affordable housing property, or other type of economic development project. So those are really exciting additions. Again, if you hit all of these, you could potentially get up to 70% credit, which is amazing. And this last bullet point, so a very big change, nonprofits and public entities, entities that don't traditionally pay taxes, had hard time accessing the value of these credits. There is now a new election where the nonprofits and public entities could now just qualify for a refund payment for the amount of the tax credit. So if it's a 30% tax credit, it would be a refund in that value, and if it's a 40%, et cetera. And so essentially there's an election, and then the IRS will essentially cut a refund check for the value. So that simplifies a lot of logistics for a project owner if you're a nonprofit. Section 45L is an existing credit that was increased and expanded. These are for energy efficient homes. So if you're a home builder or a developer, net zero, I think it's net zero ready really, and Energy Star homes, 5,000 for a single family, 2,500 for Energy Star single family. And then also for multifamily, there are great incentives for projects that might be condominium or rental, 1,000 a unit for multifamily net zero, 500 a unit for Energy Star. And there are prevailing wage requirements that apply to some of these tax credits. And so if you meet some of those requirements, you could actually bump up those amounts there. You see 5,000 for net zero and 2,500 for Energy Star. 179D is a tax deduction I think many of you are familiar with, also got extended and increased. So energy efficient commercial property, envelope improvements, lighting, HVAC, those types of approaches. It's a per square foot amount. And if you have a reduction of costs by more than 25%, you can get up to $1 per square foot. And then on top of that, you actually can you multiply that by 5, where you meet, again, prevailing wage, and there's apprenticeship requirements in the IRA as well. A new approach in the 179D is the availability for a retrofit plan for existing buildings. And both public and private nonprofit organizations can now allocate to the designer. Before it was just government buildings and public tax exempt owners. So now private nonprofits can also allocate to the designer. These next two ones are really just applicable for personal residences. So again, 30% tax credits for energy improvements, doors and windows, those types of things. I'll go to the next one. And then 30% tax credit again for personal residences if you put solar on your home, fuel cell, geothermal, battery storage is now allowable cost. So for your homes, these two credits would be valuable. All right, and so just building off of Kim's presentation, on the right-hand side, if you look at the different incentives, you can have a 30% credit on the solar part of the elementary school, 30%, possibly more, depending on if you can get those bonuses for the ground source heat pumps. And then the 179D deduction, again, there's probably a lot more calculations that need to happen in terms of exactly what per square foot amount you are, but the IRA benefits 6.8 to 7.6 million. So combining that with the potential path 1 incentives, you're getting close to $10 million of incentives. I mean, that is a very just compelling story there. On the next example, so we're talking about the deep energy retrofit again, 30%. So if this is a library, let's call it a nonprofit or a public owner, you can get a cash rebate for 30% of the solar, and the commercial, the 179D commercial energy improvement. may be able to assign it to the designer of the property. So let's say roughly, let's just call it almost $300,000 of IRA incentives, combining with the MassSave incentives, close to $900,000. Just for this example. And finally, the affordable housing example. Again, the solar tax credits, depending on if you can get the the bonus for the economic justice, it's probably a 50% tax credit, which is amazing. Again, add another 10% if there's domestic content. So that's a huge incentives. Additionally, if there are multifamily units involved that would be net zero ready or Energy Star ready, that could add some additional tax credits. And so up to 700,000, more than 700,000 in IRA incentives, and adding that to the MassSave, you get north of $100 million. So again, big dollars here in play. So I think that's my last slide.
Yes, that's your last slide. I've been having issues muting myself for some reason. So thanks, Jerome. Jerome, I know you need to peel off, I believe, at around 1 o'clock. There are a lot of questions for you in the chat. If we don't get to all, so if you want to take a look, if we don't get to all of them, I think we're going to post, again, the presentation as well as the recording on our website. And we can also take out a lot of the questions and do in fact on there as well. So that if not all the questions get answered today, we'll do that. And we're going to answer questions later as well. So thanks, Jerome. And now we are going on to Mark Sandeen. Mark, let's hear a little bit about how this plays out.
Yes, hello. My name is Mark Sandeen. I'm a Lexington Select Board member and former chair of the Sustainable Lexington Committee. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about Lexington's experience designing 2 net zero schools and the establishment of the town's integrated building design policy. In Lexington, we asked ourselves, is it possible to design healthy, resilient, all-electric schools with the highest standards for indoor air quality and energy efficiency, a building that generates more energy on site than it uses, and do that with a lower total life cycle cost than a traditional design? And the answer was yes. Hastings School that you're looking at here is a 110,000 square foot building for 645 students that is operating and fully occupied today. The solar energy system and energy storage system are expected to be interconnected in a few weeks. The foundational critical success factors, if you could stay on the first slide. The foundational critical success factors in this decision-making design process is changing from a traditional focus on upfront costs and payback times to a cash flow model based on how we actually pay for our buildings in Lexington. So let me ask you a question. How many folks listening today pay for their buildings with cash up front? Well, in Lexington, we finance our buildings with 30-year bonds. The building's total cost is our cash flow, a combination of operating and maintenance costs plus the debt service on the bond. So our life cycle cost analysis focuses on whether the lower operating and maintenance costs of a net zero design can offset the increased debt service. And our target is to be cash flow positive on the first day that the students move in. So how did this journey go? Well, when we first asked ourselves, is it possible to design a net zero school? There were no net zero schools in Massachusetts. And the conventional wisdom was that it would be impossible to design a 3-story building with a gymnasium and a cafeteria in Massachusetts to net zero standards. So we started by asking, would it be possible to improve the building's overall energy efficiency by 30% compared to the conventional code designs? And surprisingly, the design team came back with a cost-effective design that reduced our energy use by 50%, while still achieving our highest standards for indoor air quality. Now, conventional designs for HVAC would have filled the roof with HVAC equipment, eliminating the opportunity for solar. But ground source heat pumps could free up the roof for solar and would dramatically increase the cost. Even with solar covering the roof, there wouldn't be enough power to get to net zero. So we asked, what about the parking lots? Could we put solar canopies in our parking lots and make up the difference? And the answer came back, yes. Solar canopies would produce roughly 2/3 of the building's energy usage, and the rooftop solar would cover the rest. And next slide. So now let's take a look at the economics of solar power. A lot of people might think that if you install solar and it covers all of your electricity usage, your electricity bill should be zero. But in Lexington, about 45% of our electricity charges come from demand charges, and adding solar power would do very little to reduce those charges because our building energy usage isn't correlated to solar production, and passing clouds cause solar production to drop. So next slide. Next, yeah, there you go. Oops. Well, when we get back to the slide, you're going to see, we're seeing a screen here. So when we get back to that slide, what you're going to see is that Lexington High School's energy usage is not correlated, shows how building energy usage is correlated with the solar energy system on the roof. And well, what you will see when this slide comes back is you'll see that we turn our buildings on at 5 or 6 in the morning, well before solar production starts. And you can also see what happens when we have a cloudy day. So next slide. This slide shows the before and after energy modeling for Hastings School before adding energy storage and solar. The top chart shows the energy usage from the electrical utilities perspective, and the bottom chart shows the energy use in blue from the utilities perspective after implementing solar and storage. So yellow is solar and green is storage, and you can see the dramatic reduction in electricity demand during the grid's peak demand hours. Next slide. So what does that mean for the economics of this project? Hastings uses about 975,000 kilowatt hours of electricity a year, and the solar energy system will produce about 1.1 million kilowatt hours of electricity a year. Without solar and storage, that electricity would have cost, when we modeled it back 4 or 5 years ago, about $250,000 a year. So many folks are surprised to see that energy storage generates about 4 times the value for this project than the solar alone. Solar storage systems can double the peak demand savings we showed in the previous slide by participating in a program called Connected Solutions that comes from our utilities that pays for batteries to discharge during the grid's peak demand times during the summer. And heat pumps also earn alternative portfolio standard revenue for each megawatt hour generated by the heat pumps. And the value of that revenue stream doubles when you have 100% energy production on site. Next slide. Another success factor in this process is using a scenario-based structure for looking at all the key assumptions from a low, medium, and high estimate perspective, from 5% probability at the low end to 95% probability at the high end. We prepare a range of estimates for interest rates, for costs of systems, for energy costs and potential incentives. And we do this in an integrated fashion, looking at the synergistic benefits of all the decisions together. Conventional modeling would look at each decision in isolation. Should we do solar? Should we do ground source heat pumps? Should we invest in an energy efficient envelope? And traditionally, those siloed energy decisions would have decided against each one of those options. But we found that a larger solar array helps pay for the energy storage, which lowers the cost of energy, which makes the payback for the heat pump even more attractive, and also increases the value of the heat pump incentives from the state. Next slide. So this slide summarizes the integrated scenario-based financial analysis that we complete. What it shows is that the incremental debt service required to fund the ground source heat pumps in 3 scenarios, from the number of wells to the cost per foot to the interest rate that it costs to finance those wells, Across the top, it shows the potential benefits based on the size of the solar and storage, the value of energy, incentives, and maintenance costs. And what we found from this analysis is that if we took the worst possible case for the ground source heat pump debt and compared it to the worst possible case for the benefits from solar and storage and energy savings, we'd still be net cash flow positive, making the decision to go net zero no-brainer. Our financial analysis team is highly conservative. And when we set these scenario assumptions, we were cautious. And as a result, after the completion of the project, we found that we actually delivered the ground source heat pump at the low end of the cost, with fewer wells, lower cost per foot, and lower interest rates than we expected. And we found that the benefits from the solar, the storage, and the energy savings came in at the top end of the range. And as a result, Hastings School's operating costs came in at the low end of the scenario range and the benefits at the high end of the range. Next slide. So this is a highly repeatable process. Lexington has another net zero preschool building, the Lexington Children's Place, which is about 20,000 square feet and 72 students, that opened in September 2019. We've now approved all electric HVAC designs for our fire station, our police station, our visitor center, and all of LexHab's affordable housing units constructed in the last 6 years. The financial analysis I presented only looks at hard measurable energy-related numbers, but our focus on health in Lexington is what drives the true return on investment for these projects. We're seeing that optimizing for high indoor air quality delivers fewer sick days, improved staff productivity, better teacher retention, improved cognitive performance, and perhaps most amazingly enough, 4 times better performance in a crisis. These are the outcomes we really desire. So when we were first asked, is it possible to design a net zero school, there were no net zero schools in Massachusetts, but now designing net schools is becoming the industry best practice. Brookline, Belmont, Boston, Cambridge, Medfield, all are moving in this direction. And you can't start this process early enough. So anyway, that's our story, and love to talk with anybody who would like to repeat this kind of thing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I know everyone, when we start seeing the money and seeing it, it's one thing to see the case studies and see projected results. When you start hearing Mark talk about actually what's happening, it makes it all so much more real. So now our last presenter for today, rounding us out, is going to be Jacob Lucas with Eversource.
Thank you so much, Meredith. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jacob Lucas, and I'm the Director of Transmission System Planning at Eversource, and I'm here to answer an important question that often comes up in this context, and it's whether or not the electric grid will be ready for all these new electric loads that we're planning for. And it can be hard to find information to research this topic, and so I wanted to highlight some of the key initiatives and activities that are going on to get the grid ready, because I believe it will be. So Eversource is New England's largest utility, probably serving 4.4 million customers across our electric, natural gas, and water operating companies. You see our service territory map there on the right, but it's in the states of Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. Eversource owns approximately 49% of New England's electric transmission system. That equates to approximately 4,500 miles. Eversource has its own corporate goal to be carbon neutral by 2030. I wanted to highlight this because Eversource does view itself as a key partner and solution provider for our communities that want to decarbonize, but we're also trying to do it ourselves. So we do have a corporate goal to be carbon neutral by 2030 also. And I just wanted to highlight a couple of generation projects because I'll emphasize this later on in my slides. But in the state of Massachusetts, approximately 5 or 6 years ago, they had some state regulations that allowed the distribution companies to build, own, and operate their own solar PV facilities. Eversource did that. We have approximately 70 megawatts operating now. Apparently that went well because Massachusetts is going for a second round of this, and Eversource has submitted projects into the second round of that as well. So we are operating and running our own solar PV facilities. And kind of lastly, I just want to emphasize, to the extent people aren't aware, Eversource does have a joint venture with the largest offshore wind developer in the world, Ørsted. And through this joint venture, Eversource is developing approximately 1,800 megawatts of offshore wind projects. These are enough to power more than 1 million homes across New England and New York. I have a team that's working on these projects, so I can tell you from firsthand experience, Eversource is putting in a lot of work to create this new industry for the United States, large-scale offshore wind projects. So the last thing I just wanted to cover is, like, why am I qualified to answer this question about whether or not the grid will be ready? So just a high-level overview of what transmission system planning is and what my role at Eversource is. You can essentially think of it as so transmission lines are the high voltage lines, usually regarded as over 100,000 volts and higher on the large steel towers usually. And transmission system planning, this is really our job. We look far out into the future to ensure that the electric transmission system, the electric grid, can reliably serve load in the future. Traditional planning horizon is 10 years. But now, as a result of decarbonization and electrification, we are looking farther out, and I'll highlight that in subsequent slides. So just some quick facts about the current state of the grid. New England's generation supply is currently primarily natural gas at 46% and nuclear at 23%. Renewable generation is approximately at 17% now, which is 6 gigawatts of solar PV currently installed. We are seeing forecasts of that number increasing to roughly 20 gigawatts in the 2035 timeframe. Importantly, right now, due to winter loads, oil does remain an important component of winter reliability. And some key demand numbers that I want to highlight here, because these will come up later. The all-time record electric peak occurred back in 2006 for New England, and this was 28 gigawatts. Remember that number. It's an important number. If you're curious, this year in 2022, our load was approximately our peak electric demand was approximately 25 gigawatts. So you can see over the last 16 years, loads have been flat or really gone down a little bit. And so that's also important for this question. Will the electric grid be ready for decarbonization? And I have to emphasize here the importance of interties to our neighboring regions, both in Canada and New York. Anyone that's read the Massachusetts Decarbonization Roadmap emphasizes this is one of key pillars, because New England is a net importer. I've got some numbers here, both from Canada and New York. But the bottom line is New England is a net importer. It's important to increase our interties for future reliability. So real quick, as we think about this question of whether or not the grid will be ready for decarbonization in the future, I know this often comes up as we think about our own projects, our own building projects to install heat pumps, et cetera. But what's really important to understand what the electric grid does. It moves power from generation sources to load, right? And so it's more than just thinking about the electrification projects that we're working on. It's also thinking about the changes to supply, because yes, New England's climate policies are expecting to reduce CO2 emissions. This is already happening. In the last decade, we've had 7 gigawatts of generation retire or announce retirements, and we expect in the next 3 years another 5 gigawatts of retirements. So the generation fleet and the fuel mix that we use to generate electricity is changing, and so you can see with the red box here that's highlighting some of the key growth we're seeing on the supply side. You know, over 10 gigawatts of offshore wind, over 10 gigawatts of solar generation, and this can in some ways help solve the problems that we might see from thermal overloads from the electric grid, because now, like distributed energy resources is a perfect example. We've got more solar PV spread out across the system. So it's not, the electric grid isn't simply moving all the power from the large nuclear plant to the load in the state, right? So we've got generation sources kind of dispersed throughout the state, and that can help. So when you think about this question, hey, will the grid be ready? It's important to think, yes, supply is changing. Yes, demand is changing, but also supply is changing as well. So just to put some key stats here on where we see loads today, what the current load forecasting looks like, and then what our longer term future scenarios here. You see the bar charts here on this slide. So like I said, 2022 actual peak, which occurred in the summer, was roughly 25 gigawatts. Every year, the distribution companies go through a very formal load forecasting process, and this process looks out as far as 10 years into the future. So those are the black bars you see here on this slide. So the current forecasting process is indicating the 2031 summer peak ties 28 gigawatts. Told you remember that number because that was the all-time system peak we had back in 2006. So this is 25 years later. We're still expecting electric load to be where it was back in 2006. So that's really important for some of the enablement that I'll refer to later in subsequent slides. And so what you see on the right are I'm referring to these as scenarios because it's important to understand the distinction between these aren't forecasts, but we're trying to build multiple future scenarios of what the future is going to look like under different decarbonization futures, right? And so this is just one example, but there's some important key takeaways that I do want to highlight. So on the purple bars, those are for 2035. What you see is this is approximately the time frame where we expect electric peak load to shift from being normally occurring in the summer to having the peak annual load occur in the winter. So as you can see, the winter bar here is higher than the summer bar. And this is approximately 35 gigawatts of an annual peak in the winter timeframe. So roughly a 7 gigawatt load increase over what our current forecasts are showing for 2031. That's one key takeaway. Second key takeaway is, and I don't want to hide the ball here, yes, in 2050, we are seeing loads as high as in the 50 gigawatt range. And so that is approximately doubling of where we are today. So some of the key activities that are going on in the transmission space to identify cost-effective upgrades that might be needed for decarbonization. I'm going to break it down at a federal level, regional level, and local level. And so real quick, because all these processes are identifying upgrades that we might need to make to the system to get the grid ready. So this is kind of answering that question of, okay, well, what are you doing to get the grid ready? So the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is building for the future through a pending rulemaking where they're essentially changing how we do long-range transmission system planning, where the proposal is to mandate looking farther out into the future, 20 plus years, looking at more scenarios, but also importantly, they're giving us hook to plan for scenarios that include federal, state, and local laws that affect demand response, decarbonization, electrification, et cetera. So now our models that we build, that identify upgrades will include these state policies. Really important. At a regional level, we are seeing through that traditional load forecasting process that's done by the Independent System Operator of New England, we are seeing they're putting a lot of work and a lot of effort into pulling electrification loads into that process as well. Just real quickly, the most recent 2022 forecast had roughly 3.5 gigawatts of electrification loads, both for vehicles and heating in 2031. So it's good to see that, and that'll keep happening every year. And the New England states asked ISO New England to perform a 2050 study based on the Massachusetts decarbonization all options pathway. And there were some really important findings from this, which is really, there were not many significant transmission overloads in Massachusetts all the way through 2035. And while new transmission is likely needed for 2050, those transmission overloads are highly dependent on the assumptions that are made for the location of the new renewables. That's really, really important to think about as you think about where we might need to make targeted system improvements. It's dependent on where you assume the new renewables will be located. And locally, Eversource is doing our own work to right-size the projects that we're doing locally, because Eversource might be just from aging infrastructure, performing our own asset condition projects. We are making sure we built up a team that does advanced long-range forecasting. We've got data scientists that are looking at traffic patterns and charging behaviors and all sorts of other things. But we are making sure that the work that we're doing now is right-sized for the future, such that we won't have to go and replace that work longer in the future. I'm going to highlight a couple projects on some slides later. But you often hear about grid enhancing technologies and microgrids and all these things. And Eversource is doing a lot of these projects right now, and I'll highlight a couple later. At the distribution level, I do want to emphasize right now what we're seeing really for the projects that we're studying, the electrification projects that we're studying, really all across all three states, is the system currently has available headroom. And it's because of that winter shifting peak issue that I was highlighting earlier, because the average substation across Eversource's system, and this is just a general number, but we're seeing in the winter approximately 20% below their limits in the winter. And so the projects that are coming through now, while yes, they have to be analyzed case by case, but we are seeing many of them really take advantage of available headroom. And so that's great for the projects that we see coming through now. Longer term, we do see that that transition to a winter peaking system happen between 2030 and 2035. And so Eversource has proposed to try to get more data. Data is key when we try to analyze these future scenarios. And so we're implementing advanced metering infrastructure to get more data about what our loads are doing on the system. And again, we have started performing our advanced long range forecasting, as I said, looking at EV charging behavior, but we're also looking at by zip codes, because what's important is we really want to build 8760, so hourly load profiles for each substation on our system. And we're doing this by looking at, for example, building square footage by zip code. Some of the, I'm not going to touch on any of this because I'm going to try to catch us back up on timing. But just real quickly, we're seeing a lot of added value from this advanced long range forecasting that we're doing. And one example of that is highlighted here in blue font on this slide. And it's providing like a feedback loop for energy efficiency programs and our gas business. So really, this has proved to provide a lot of really key information that's proved to be a lot of helpful. So we're doing a lot. Our data scientists are looking at all sorts of things to provide valuable input. Two other projects on the next slide that I just wanted to highlight real quick, because these usually have interest, and so I just want to quickly touch on them. This is a really successful example of a non-wireless alternative, a microgrid project that is in operation, went into operation in June of 2022. And so it's a battery storage microgrid that Eversource has built for Provincetown. Provincetown is at the very end of Cape Cod. We were seeing reliability issues because it's one long radial line serving Provincetown, and the loss of that line, the customers, it's approximately 10,000, a little bit over 10,000 customers in Provincetown and the surrounding area, they're out of service. And so it was really difficult to try to site a new line. It's a lot of protected lands out that way. And so we looked at this. It was a very, very technically challenging project because it's a 25 megawatt, 38 megawatt hour battery. It's very large, but it has successfully operated. And it was just beautiful to see it actually work. We lost the line since June, we've lost the line. And this battery storage facility served all of Provincetown seamlessly, switches over instantaneously, customers don't even notice. And we've got a lot of, we won an energy industry award for this project. It's gotten a lot of trade press. So I just wanted to highlight here as an example of us trying to think creative, right? You need to innovate for this future grid. Here's kind of an example of that. And on the next slide, I just want to quickly touch on Eversource's offshore wind projects, because one of the things you always hear about offshore wind is it's always a year away, and then you get to next year and it's another year away, and it's another year away. And I'm just so pleased to report that Eversource's South Fork Wind project will be online before this time next year, and that is a roughly 130 megawatt project that interconnects into the Hamptons on Long Island, and that project alone offsets 300,000 tons of carbon dioxide annually, just that project. And you can go on our website and see the status of this. We actually have the jacking vessel out there right now installing the sea cable. A lot of activity going on with this project right now, and it's very exciting. But the project for New England is Revolution Wind here. You see in the bottom right, it's approximately 700 megawatts, interconnects to Davisville, Rhode Island. And as an example of kind of creating this industry, I never would have expected this, but we actually have to, we're building a boat for this to be able to install the wind turbines due to the Jones Act, and it limits the vessels that can dock in our harbors and things. So we're building a boat for Revolution Wind. Didn't expect that. Pretty exciting. Sunrise Wind, I just wanted to highlight here because it's going to be an HVDC project, and it's interconnecting into Holbrook, Long Island. So these are really exciting projects that I'm working on personally, and I'm really happy here to answer any questions that people might have on this question of whether or not the grid will be ready. Feel free to reach out to me, jacob.lucas at eversource.com. It can be really hard to find this information, so I just want to make myself available. Thank you so much. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, and Jacob, and thanks to all of our presenters today. We have a couple more slides. Jacob, I think we're gonna have to play back your presentation at half speed. Speed it up and then sped it up. Lots of information and really exciting things to see. At the end of the slide presentation that we'll post, we have some links to the resources that were shown in here. And I also wanted to, we're going to go into Q&A now, but before we do, before you start signing off, I wanted to give a shout out to my co-conspirators on this with MassCEC and ZeroCarbonMA. But then there were a whole lot of groups, many of you who are on here today, who helped to spread the word and bring many of you guys here today. So questions. there are way more questions on here than I was anticipating. You guys have a great group with questions. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually ask the presenters to be, which I know they've been doing, is looking at the chat, and I'm going to ask them to be looking for the most questions that I think that need to be answered, and then we'll follow up with a fact after. I am going to start with Mark Sandeen. And Mark, I know that people are really fascinated with yours because it applies to their, it applies to a lot of municipalities who are on here today. How can they find out more information? Do you have a longer version of this that's been recorded? How do they know more about what Lexington is doing and how it plays out?
Well, I have gone to school committee or select board meetings for other towns that are in the process of doing this. I'd be happy to do that if you have a project. And otherwise, feel free to send me an email and we can chat offline. I'm always happy to talk about net zero schools with anybody working on that.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to pass it over. Kim, are there any pressing questions that were in the chat that you want to talk about with the group?
I tried to answer, I think, as many of them as I could. If people have separate questions and want to ask me offline about a specific project, I'm happy to answer those. I think I covered it, but if anybody
there might
wants
be.
something else.
Not everyone is going to is watching the chat as we're going through this presentation, so I think it would be helpful to call out one or two that were most important.
Okay, so what I was saying.
And before you go, yes, this recording is going to be available to share with others in your town and really with anyone. We're going to both share this actual recording and also have the slides so you can use those yourself, of course, with credit.
Yeah, so what I was seeing most relevant in the chat were questions about projects that are in municipal light plant service territories. So projects where you're in the service territory where you have your own municipal utility that doesn't pay the system. Any project in that service territory attached to the municipal light plant is not going to pay into the system benefit charge that is the funding source for MassSave projects. So there's this one scenario where if you have a brand new building that's going in a municipal light plant service territory that is not going to have any gas service, because that's what we all want. We want to decarbonize. Can that be supported by MassSave? And that's been a difficult question to answer because projects that don't pay into the fund don't normally don't participate. There was a project that was in the media recently where one of the PAs was trying to support that project, and I think it got spun a little bit such that they were trying to encourage gas. No one is trying to encourage gas. No one of the MassSave companies, even those of us who have gas service, are trying to encourage someone to put in a gas meter that they don't want. That is not happening. That said, that case that I just mentioned is a thorny case, and DOER is aware of it. And so if you do have a project in that scenario, and you should bring it to DOER, because I think we all collectively want to find out how to encourage and support those types of projects. I don't know if MassSave will be able to support that kind of project going forward. It may be able to. Talk to National Grid in that case that someone was mentioning there, and definitely talk to DOER.
Great, thanks, Kim.
Yep.
Jacob, I've got one for you from Stephen Frail on how can a town determine the grid's local capacity to support our electrification efforts? There's more to the question, but where are the bottlenecks for municipalities? Should they be reaching out to Eversource as they adopt their climate action goals?
It's a great question. Thank you so much for the question. I mean, each town. Eversource has account executives that handle each town. To the extent someone in the audience isn't aware of who's there is. It can be a web trying to figure out the appropriate contact at Eversource. I'm happy to help kind of chase that down for you. But but yeah, I mean, this is it's kind of like what Kim was saying. Similarly here, it's just my best advice is to reach out to us early, so we can start researching what the loads would look like, so this would be a feeder by feeder type analysis. And we've got circuit owners, individual circuit owners for every single feeder on our system. And so they absolutely could look into your project for sure. So just, the proper point of contact would be through the account executive. But to the extent that doesn't work, feel free to, reach out to me and I'll help chase it down. But reach out to us early. The earlier, the better. So we can start studying it and seeing what the impacts are.
Great. Thanks, Jacob. Jim, I'm going to pass it over to you now. With Luke, I think we'll come to you next. Looking at the chat, the questions that most stick out to you that you want to make sure you get out to people?
Sure. There's a couple of good questions surrounding ventilation. Why weatherization and ventilation if we all know that weatherizing buildings is really what we should be all doing. And the answer there was really for the deep energy retrofit program, looking to expand the opportunities for customers to achieve the greenhouse gas reduction goals in certain high ventilation load environments like laboratories, certain hospital environments, where the ventilation loads are necessarily high. Weatherizing those spaces just might not make the impact that is necessary to reach those high goals. So in those particular cases, addressing the ventilation, possibly reducing or optimizing the ventilation might be your best pathway to reach savings. I think there was a theme that I just wanted to underscore with myself, Jacob, Kimberly. Early engagement is really the best thing you can do with most of our programs to assure traction and success. So you can never be too early. Worst case, we'll put you off for a period of time, but there is scenarios where if you engage too late, then there are some opportunities that could be missed. I think Meredith, maybe one more. It was asked, how do you reach the appropriate contact within our groups, which, Jacob alluded to is sometimes a bit challenging. Any of our program web pages should have either a direct or generalized contact. If not, you can certainly reach out to any representative that you see on the panel or others, and we'll steer you in the right direction. But every municipality, every commercial customer should have an assigned efficiency consultant as well as an assigned service consultant as well. So there are dedicated people for all of you, and we can help you reach them as needed.
Great, thanks. Luke, what did you see in the questions?
There were a few, and I guess big picture, the MassSave incentives work with the IRA tax incentives. And so those are different sources and can be additive. A question came up about for the all electric single family to four family, whether or not that really is kind of in line with the upcoming stretch code. And while the level 1 is, under current standards ahead of the code when the new code comes into effect, level 1 will be somewhat closer to the code. However, it does still include some upgrades in terms of what is required to achieve the incentives. And for single family projects in particular, the HERS score of 45 for level 1 is equivalent to the code, but the level 2 HERS score of 35 is considerably tighter. And in addition, an infiltration test result that is considerably tighter. So that would be the major item that I caught. And in terms of accessing information, the MassSave website for residential new construction will lead you to the registration forms, but by all means, any residential new construction question can come to me directly. I'm happy to answer anything at any time. on the all electric or on the passive house, although my focus is on passive house generally. So.
I am actually going to, Kim, what about, what else? We have 10 minutes left and we're thinking about closing thoughts. Maybe we can get some last thoughts from what are most important to think about.
So I have one thing that I meant to mention in my presentation, but so we did all the decision-making process I presented today. We did this about 5 years ago. That's how long it takes to do one of these projects. And so there were no Inflation Reduction Act benefits. So it would be easier for us today to be able to do these schools as net zero than it was 5 years ago. So because Inflation Reduction Act has direct pay to municipalities for ground source heat pumps and for solar and for energy storage, we essentially put this process on rocket boosters. So I really think we're going to be able to do a lot more. I think every municipality should be re-looking at their assumptions on how their school projects look going forward in light of the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah, I second that entirely. And so it's really, I mean, as Mark said, these projects take multiple years to get in, in the queue, and you're thinking about them and planning them multiple years before you even get them, get your architects hired. And so the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits are available, I think, through 2030 something. I can't remember what the date was. So there's time, but definitely start thinking about it now. And we, again, MassSave stands ready to help you. Contact us as early as possible. We have support that we can bring to bear to help you think about, what language you might put in a request for services, for design services or owner project management services. We can help you with questions that you can ask to kind of make sure you're soliciting the design team that can do this type of work. We're going to be doing more work going forward with sharing information. And what are we kind of learning from some of these ground source heat prep projects, for example, and getting that information shared across multiple municipalities so that, we're not just learning in a silo in Stoneham and Westwood and Lexington, but we're sharing that information. So stay tuned for all that as well.
A quick wrap up thought that I have having listened to this, I think people are more familiar with new construction and the process. The thought of taking advantage of the deep energy retrofit path as a municipality is a little harder. But I would encourage folks, there's almost always someone who's working on asset management at municipalities, and that asset management, whether it's school or municipal buildings, whenever a roof is getting close, that is the time to be starting to think about this, because it often does align with other things that need to be upgraded at the same time, and thinking of it as a package. So reach out to the asset managers, start talking to them, and start thinking about these other improvements that need to be made, and whether the deep energy retropath could be an option as part of that.
And Beverly, could I add one comment to that, please? So for folks who engage in the deep energy retrofit program, but may not be able to ultimately achieve the goals, there is no penalty for doing so. So I just wanted to let folks know that, that early engagement, you can lay out that roadmap. You have 3 years to participate. If the goals aren't achieved, there is a milestone payment made at the 25% achievement level, and no penalty if you can't go beyond that. So just wanted to let folks know that right out the gate.
And I know Jerome presented this in his presentation, but just let me emphasize again that as energy prices are rising, low income folks are hurt the most. And the Inflation Reduction Act has incredible boosters for low income, so that when you're doing a solar project, instead of 30% tax credit, you're getting 50% tax credit, similar boosters for low income projects. So what we're seeing is our low income housing association is is focusing on retrofits for the coming year based on the Inflation Reduction Act.
I'll emphasize on that, Mark, that in our report on the status of net zero buildings in Mass, that the largest building type for net zero is affordable housing right now. So affordable housing is really leading the market. I think some of the points that people get, the adders that you can get for some towns have density bonuses, but even all of this, it's really driving it. If we can do it in affordable housing, we can do this just about anywhere. And I'm going to underline Fred's underlining of Mark's statements, that a lot of the work they did that Mark was doing was before the current incentives, and that, you know, that there's a lot of lessons to be learned moving forward. Couple more minutes. Jacob, any closing thoughts from you?
Sorry, I was just trying to answer some questions in the chat. So I guess apologies for talking so fast. But I do just appreciate everybody and the invite to allow me to come and speak on all the activities that are going on to get the grid ready, because it's just I've just heard like misinformation and just other things out there, and I just wanted to, you know, try to make some of the key initiatives and key activities, just cover them here in my presentation. So hopefully the main takeaway for everyone was like, there are a lot of people that are working hard and a lot of various initiatives to have the grid be ready. We understand, like, as more of our society relies on electricity, we've got to be ready. So thanks. Yep.
Great. Bev, Lisa, my co-conspirators, any closing thoughts from you guys?
I would just say spread the word. It usually takes people a lot of times hearing things to absorb this kind of level of detail. And all we're trying to do here is touch on the point that there's a lot of resources, and start early and be ambitious. So thanks for joining us today.
And I want to thank Meredith for highlighting what is the new industry best practices. Always on the leading edge. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to everybody, to all the presenters, just working so hard to make this come together, and for all the people who attended. And also just highlight that the presentation will be sent out to everybody, so you can watch it on a recording, you can share with your colleagues, and that everybody who presented today is very open to hearing more questions from all of you. So we'll share all these resources. But thanks again to the fabulous presenters and to Bev and Meredith for this collaboration.
Thanks, Lisa. And I'll add, if you want to learn more about these things, one of the things Built Environment Plus does is we do a lot of trainings. We can get funding for folks who pay into unemployment for some of these classes through the Commonwealth. We're able to offer passive house training for free for those who pay into unemployment in Massachusetts, along with a whole other bunch of courses. We have conversations that we host to dive deeper. So if there's something that you need, reach out. We do have, Ryan was just posting some links to our calendar, and also to specific courses that you might be interested in the chat. So we'll leave the chat up for a few minutes if people want to scroll through it. And as someone said, anyone can save the chat down to reference later for all of the links. And we'll be taking the chat and doing a FAQ on our website as well. I put the link on to our website, which is builtenvironmentplus.org. So with that, I'm just going to give a big thank you to everyone. A lot of work went into this presentation. Emphasize the point, watch it again. I know Eversource, you're doing another presentation on some of your rebates coming up, incentives coming up soon. Kim, there was one question about relationship with National Grid, and I know that you're here really talking about MassSave, and MassSave in the beginning, I think it was Jim laid out all the partners in MassSave, and just wanted to give you an opportunity to mention that.
Yeah, and I just responded to
Okay, good.
Paul's comment there. Just to be clear, yeah, today I was also representing all of the MassSave sponsors. So National Grid has all of these same programs that both Jim Piermarini and I were representing in ICF. They're all across all the MassSave companies.
Great. Thanks for that clarification. So with that, we'll leave the chat open for a couple of minutes. Thank you, everyone. Thanks to Bev and Lisa and all of our presenters. And let's go build more of these buildings. And I'm hoping that we get to have more, that next time we'll be doing case studies on these projects, showing how many of you on here take these incentives and put them into action. So thank you.